progressively a little more difficult. The first couple writing assignments, the short message and the positive message are pretty, oops, that's not what I wanted. Let me try that again. Are pretty straightforward. They're direct messages. Bad news and persuasive are a little more difficult. They take a little more thought. They're a little, I think, just because they're not as straightforward. And I think especially the persuasive can sometimes be a little bit challenging. Okay. So with that, here we go. All right. I don't know why I used all their slides. So I think there's some things to understand with this in our digital age, because it is a little different now, and we definitely live in some interesting times as far as this goes. If you'd asked me a number of years ago, like, hey, we're going to have this source of information on your phone and computers and everywhere else that gives you all the answers to everything in the world, and I would have thought, that sounds fantastic. This will clear a lot of things up. I honestly feel like right now we're at a point in time in history in our country where it's like, I don't even know what's like real half the time anymore. It's kind of crazy, but it also shows you how people can be influenced, right? Depending on certain things. We're going to talk about using it for good and not for evil or personal gain, if you will. I want to talk about it from a positive way in a business context. So I think there's some things to understand about it, first of all. I think the first two things on this list, and this is just more in the workplace, those first two things on the list, leaner corporate hierarchies and blurring lines of authority. So I think those two things are kind of going hand in hand. Companies have a lot less layers in their organizations now. They run much smaller and much leaner. That's just a fact. I mean, a lot of it is financial. I mean, fewer employees means you can save money. Obviously, that's part of it. And another reason is the fewer people you have to communicate things with, right? The more quickly you can implement change and get information out. Sometimes these things used to take a while because it had to go through all kinds of layers in an organization. And now, also with the advent of something like email, right? Or other means of communicating, we get messages out a lot quicker. So there's a lot less there, in other words, in terms of people that we go between. Another thing is the blurring lines of authority. And really what that is, I think that's twofold. I think number one, we've sort of encouraged that a little bit. In other words, who's really in charge of this stuff? I think we've encouraged that because we want people to communicate. I think number two, also people it's sometimes jarring for me because I started working a long time ago and I was used to things like you go to your boss, you don't go over your boss's head, and things like that. Nobody follows a chain of command anymore. Everybody just everybody just wants to see the manager instantly, to resolve things. And I understand that. And so with that going on, it means sometimes having persuasive skills can be really important. Another thing we do too is we rely on teams. We work in teams a lot more as opposed to strict hierarchies. And as I think some of you are finding out as you get started with these group projects, right? It's a little harder to influence people when you're peers, right? Because for lack of a better term, right? In back of someone's mind, they're going, you're not the boss of me, right? So how do you influence them? Whereas if I'm your manager and you're the employee, and I ask you to do so. I love the part where somebody asks somebody to do something that's part of their job and then they question that. I'm like, that's kind of what you got hired for. But it does require a difference. It's a little easier when you're someone's supervisor to get them to do something than it is when it's a peer. Some of you are probably going, no, it's not. It's still hard. But the one thing you do have, right, if you're someone's boss, right, is you have some leverage there. Their schedule, their pay, their promotions, ultimately their employment may rest in your hands. So I think it's a little easier to influence. But when people are peers, it requires a different skill set, right? And as we're finding out, right, I'm sure even within your groups, I know this from working on group and team projects for years, there's some people that, you give them something, doing whatever, and they just jump on it right away, right? And there's other people where it's just a constant, I sent them an email, I texted them, I called them, I let the air out of their tires, whatever it is, we're going through all these other things to try and influence them because sometimes people just don't respond, but it does require a little bit different set of persuasion. Finally, another thing we're encountering are savvy, well-informed consumers. people have a lot more information than they used to as consumers. We used to kind of rely on the company or the salesperson or the store or the person we're speaking with, right, to get the information. Now we just go online. And, so it requires a little bit different skill set to persuade people. And then the other thing that comes into play probably too, I'm sure some of you encountered this in different parts of your job. People go out, right, and they grab information online somewhere that may or may not be correct, and then bring that back to you and go, well, this is what I read online. Just ask any medical doctor what it's like anymore dealing with patients, because they've spent hours, researching, which is good. That's a good thing, right? But sort of questioning what they're doing. I know one of my friends is a pediatrician. He's like, yeah, I haven't learned anything in the last 30 years of practice. You can just go online and do it yourself. It's very interesting, but that's something that requires a different skill set because now people possess the information. One industry that changed pretty dramatically with all that is automobile sales. It has changed a lot. Now I'll use them a lot as an example for persuasion because I actually think they do especially in the sales part, I think they do a really good job of some of the things I'll talk about tonight. But right now, if you want to buy a car, you can go online and get all kinds of information. I mean, you can get a car priced out. You can practically get a guaranteed price online and get what you want and everything else. And it didn't used to be that way. You saw an ad in the newspaper and you rolled up to the dealer and then let the show begin. We didn't really possess that information. All the power was with the car dealerships, and we were kind of left hanging because we just didn't have all that information. And so that's why you'd see people, they'd go, yeah, I went in to get this car and it was, the ad said 19,000, but then I couldn't get out of there for less than 28. Prices were lower then, it was a long time ago, but because they didn't possess all the information. Now we have all that, and so when we roll in there, we have a lot more. I know when I bought my last car 5 or 6 years ago, I did a ton of research. And when I sat down with the guy at the dealership, he started, adding everything in, and I had my price. And I think our two numbers were within like $150 of each other, in terms of all that. So consumers have a lot more, which means we have to persuade them differently. And then, so another thing too, some managers try to influence others, right? Instead of issuing commands. I think we used to be kind of in a setting where your boss or your manager said, this is what you need to do it. And I think people like to kind of know the why behind it sometimes. And good managers have always explained that. Now, I think sometimes when people ask why, it's less of wanting to know what happened than why should I do that? But the point is that good managers, right, try and influence others. You sometimes hear a term called servant leadership, and that's where really the manager exists to kind of serve the employees. And I think that's a way that people can influence them. Although I also think managers, you sometimes have to switch between roles. Sometimes you can be that very friendly, influential, collegial person. And there's other times in other environments where you need to take control of things, right? And tell people what to do, depending on what's going on. But that's how it's different now. And then just this quote here that the author says, it's a symbolic process where we're trying to convince other people to change their attitudes or their behaviors. So sometimes it's not just behavior, but getting someone to think about something a little bit differently. I think that's what you see sometimes, obviously when you're talking some of the political things, but I think also, I always think of it as maybe just getting someone to listen, right? Because sometimes people don't want to hear anything. So sometimes that influence is just getting them to listen to the perspective. And then the other part of that at the end there that's kind of key is it does need to be free choice. Ultimately, persuasion, right? That has to be something that we choose to do. We choose to be persuaded. All right. And so I just break it down this way. So persuasion just means influence, right? Because I think sometimes if we say the term persuasion, right? If somebody says, oh, she's very persuasive, right? That's not always a compliment. Right? If you think about the way people say it, it's kind of like earlier in the course when I said, oh, you're a very direct communicator. That's not always a positive because some people, it has a different meaning. So sometimes persuasion we think of somebody who's maybe manipulating or tricking someone. And that's not what we want to use in this particular case, and never that like you see in an old, mob movie or something, I can be very persuasive. That's not persuasion, that's coercion. Okay. So it's not manipulation or trickery, it's influence. And sometimes there is a little gray area there. Really good salespeople can be very persuasive, and sometimes some people don't like that. Because I think sometimes when people feel like they are being persuaded, they're losing control or something like that. But it's influence. That's all we're trying to do, is influence somebody. And then the other thing to keep in mind too is sometimes it's a process, right? If you think of something in sales, for instance, if you have no intention of buying a new car and you go by a car dealership tonight, you're probably not going to suddenly drive out of there with a new car. Happens sometimes, but generally we're not, right? It's a process. Right now, I'm not interested. I'm just gathering information. Slowly, right? We're influenced over to where it's here. So sometimes the persuasion can be a process. Good salespeople know that. They know they might have to talk to somebody a number of times, right, before they are actually able to sell them something. I know they're salespeople. They always say great things like, oh, I could sell you, a bag of ice at the North Pole. I'm such a good salesperson, or something like that, right? And it's true sometimes, but really a lot of times what it is, it's a process, right? Because ultimately the person being influenced needs to feel like they're the one making the decision. So again, the author lists these different components of persuasion. These are all just kind of high level theoretical things. It's a symbolic process. We understand that. It's something that's a little different there. And again, it involves an attempt to influence. We're trying to influence somebody. And we get this in all facets of our life. It isn't just sales and in business, but, the people we're close to when people want to do things and that sort of thing, right? Sometimes we need to influence people. And again, it's self-persuasion. Ultimately, if we decide something is someone else's idea, I'm sorry, have you ever heard that? Some of you probably know that, right? Make them think it's their idea and then they'll want to do it. That's because self-persuasion is the best. We're transmitting a message of some kind, right? It might be information, or it might be a request or something like that. And once again, it requires free choice for it to exist. I think that's the difference between real persuasion and the other things that we're talking about. Okay. So 6 principles that direct human behavior. And these are all pretty straightforward things that they all influence us to do things. I'm sending out a link. It'll go out sometime while I'm talking here, but it's a link to a podcast a couple months ago on Freakonomics, where they brought in he's a psychologist and author. His name's Robert Cialdini, and he's written books about influence. And he talks about these things in the podcast. So if you want to listen to someone who knows what they're talking about instead of me, when you get that message later, you can click on that link and listen to that. It's really interesting. But he talks about these are the things that kind of motivate human behavior. Reciprocation, right? When we reciprocate, right? A trade-off. I do something for you, you do something for me. Reciprocation in sales is I'm giving you money and you're giving me a product or service, right? There's that equal trade there. We probably all know this from doing favors for people and having them done for us, right? We kind of know that if we help somebody out with something, probably later on, we're going to need to help them out with something, right? And hopefully it's equitable. I always like the people that you do a little favor for, and then they're like, oh, hey man, can you help me move? I'm moving to Vegas this weekend. Can you give me a hand? I'm like, all you helped me with was like one little thing. But the point is, right, there is that reciprocation there. Don't laugh. I knew a guy, it's not surprising that he's an attorney now. When we were in college, he used to keep track of the favors he did for people so he could call them out later. And I was like, and he was proud of it. I was like, you probably shouldn't say that out loud, but he kept track of it. It was kind of interesting. But that does influence us, right? That's why sometimes I don't want people doing me favors, because I don't want to owe them later. But the point is, right, that will cause us to behave a certain way. It will influence us. Commitment, when we're committed to something, if we feel very strongly about something, right, we will act accordingly. You see that if somebody feels very strongly about the company they work for, the organization they work for, right, they can be persuaded much more, right, to do something that way. You see the same behavior in people that are on sports teams, right? Their commitment to their teammates is very high. Compared to, average groups of people, religion, politics, all those kinds of things, right? When people are committed to something, it's a little easier to influence them. Okay. Social proof. So one of those things there is social proof really means, you know, we do something because of other people see it and think we're a better person for it, or something along those lines, right? Or just status or whatever it is, right? Why do some people like designer products, certain kinds of designer products? Why are they willing to pay more? Well, of course they're better quality, but what's another reason, right? Because it gives you social proof. I mean, I would have no idea, but I've been in meetings and gone to things before with coworkers, and they'll lean over and go, look at that. She has an $800 purse. And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. You know, I have no clue, right? And I'm sure it looks good and I'm sure it serves the purpose, but I'm guessing it's probably not 80 times better than the $10 one, right? You know, in terms of actual function. Why do people like that? Because those brands, right, give people social status. And so I think that's or actions that we take or whatever it is, right? That's another thing that will cause us to behave a certain way. I always know one of my favorite examples is, I think it's kind of funny. It's changing now because obviously with cars, people want to save money on gas, so electric, hybrid, or whatever, but big reasons people buy them, they want to save money. A lot of people I know want them just so they can get in the carpool lane, right? Because of Southern California. Another reason is I think a lot of people like to show people they're making a statement, right? Look at me, I'm saving the planet, right? It's got to be the only reason anyone drives a Prius, because they are so ugly. I can't believe they didn't come up with a better body design than that, but it's very distinctive, right? No, I just think it's funny for all that Toyota could do, and that's the design they came up with. The point is, right, that social proof that exists there is one of the reasons that people can be persuaded to do those things. If we like something, right, face it, if we like something, we can much more easily be persuaded, just whatever it is, right? If we already are predisposed to liking something, we're much more likely to act on it versus something we don't like. Authority, and this isn't the police or anything like that, although I guess they can be kind of persuasive. You know, if you're ever heading down the freeway at 80 and you spot what happens on the freeway when you see a highway patrol car off in the distance, everybody suddenly, right, takes their foot off the accelerator. True, I guess that can be persuasive, but really what appeal to authority means is if it's someone who has a position with some kind of authority. I'm much more likely on healthcare issues. I'm much more likely to listen to my doctor, right, who went to medical school at a top school and has been practicing, you know, for 25 years and has lots of experience. I'm much more likely to listen to him than my hippie friend who gets all her research online, which God bless her, she cares a lot about that stuff. But who am I going to, I'm going to listen to my doctor because he has that formal training and has been diagnosing these things all year. And then all my hippie friends says anyway, is like, you need to get the toxins out. But the point is, right, that authority, we're much more likely to listen to somebody who has experience and knowledge in a certain area, right, versus someone who doesn't, right? That's why in some of those commercials, we see commercials all the time and they'll bring it, and it always makes me laugh because everybody's an actor and all these things. And they'll bring in someone who's dressed as a doctor, right, to say something. Well, this product will do such and such for you, you know, call, you know, now that's an appeal to authority. Finally, scarcity. You've taken economics, you know how this works, right? What happens when a product or service is scarce? One of two things can happen. It can drive the price up, obviously. Anybody who's had to go to Home Depot in the last few months knows that, right? There's been a scarcity of building products. So the price went up. So that can cause that. What's the other thing that can happen when there's scarcity? What if the price doesn't go up? What happens? We run out, right? Toilet paper a year and a half ago, right? They didn't really raise the price on it enough to keep in stock. So we just ran out. But that will cause people to behave. I mean, that was a perfect example, right? I mean, if big toilet paper needed to make sales, all they had to do was all that stuff that went down a year ago. I'm laughing because I think my mom still has stuff left that she bought 18 months ago. She even asked me, like, do you need any toilet paper? Because I think they went and bought one of those giant 144 rolls or something. But the point is, that's a perfect example. It persuaded people to go do it, right? You better act. I mean, that's, we hear that in sales all the time. Act now, right? And when things are advertised, right, there's always another sale coming up, right? What's the next one? We're probably going to have a midsummer sale. We just had 4th of July clearance. Now we'll have a midsummer sale. There's going to be a Labor Day sale, probably something in the fall, some Halloween spooktacular sale, followed up by, you know, Black Friday. Why? Because that creates the notion of scarcity, right? And that persuades people, I need to take advantage of these things now. But all of these things here, right, are things that will persuade us and cause us to act. And sometimes if you can put these, more than one of these things together, it can be very, very persuasive. And again, we're just trying to influence. You don't want to trick anyone. It'd be bad, right? If, to create, although I do think some companies do it, they occasionally create some fake scarcity, right? I'm pretty convinced Apple did that in the early days with the iPhone, right? Suddenly they're out of them, right? And people got to wait, it built up that. It's kind of a brilliant marketing move in some ways. But these are all, again, behaviors that drive humans. So how has it changed now in our more digital age? Well, the volume and reach of messages has exploded. I mean, it's everywhere. It's constant. I'm convinced that the constant connection is probably wrecking our brains in some ways, with the phones and just the constant thing. And I don't know the answer for that, but we're getting them everywhere, right? All these messages, advertising, or whether it's, political messaging or anything like that. It's just everywhere. Now it's in the palm of our hand, right? So it's everywhere. But keep in mind, even in addition to that, just think about where you go throughout the day and the amount of advertising you see, right? If you turn on the TV, you see it. If anybody still listens to the radio, you see it. You're driving down the street, right? You see billboards, you see signage on the buildings, you see some guy standing on the corner spinning a sign. You come back to your car and there's a flyer on there, so we're kind of bombarded with this stuff. And again, they're moving so quickly now. I mean, just think about anything that goes viral, right? If there's a cool ad or something out there, it goes viral, the message just gets out there instantly. I mean, and we see that. I mean, sometimes something's not quite right with them, right? An ad goes out and then within 24 hours, there's a bunch of people making fun of it or saying it's hurtful or something like that, and that company takes that thing down in 48 hours. I mean, it's remarkable how quickly stuff moves that way. And again, organizations of all stripes are in the persuasion business. It isn't just companies trying to sell us products and services, right? I mean, it's all organizations. It's the government, right? I mean, we see tons of ads now. Like, I don't even know, but they're there. I'd kind of tune out, but it's like, put your mask on, go get your shot, go do this. Politics, religions, everybody right out there is trying to influence us to either act a certain way or purchase a certain kind of product. And then another thing too, persuasive techniques can sometimes be more subtle and misleading. And we're definitely getting that right with some of, I think a great example of that, obviously, if you see political advertising, right? If one candidate, they show themselves up on the screen and they look, alive and in charge and beautiful and and then they show that whoever they're running against and they just find the ugliest picture they possibly can find of that person, right? Which that may or may not be true, but again, that's a kind of a persuasive technique that goes into it, all of those kinds of things. And then finally, another thing, I think this is kind of true. It is more complex and it's impersonal. It's pretty impersonal now. We don't get as much face-to-face persuasion simply because, well, especially in the past year and a half, people haven't been face-to-face in front of people. But on one hand, it might seem personal. You're getting the email or the text or something like that, right, from the organization. God, I know I have one of the, what's the Amazon? It's not called Echo. I wanted to say Alexa, but that's the voice. That thing occasionally, it'll light up a different color and I'll ask it what it's doing. And it's like reminding me to go buy stuff. Like, it's been a month since you bought dog food, and it's cool and creepy at the same time. That seems very personalized, and they pulled it from all my data, right? And all my previous purchases. But at the same time, it's pretty impersonal. I mean, there's not like somebody at Amazon goes, hey, somebody give Dealey a call. Tell me he needs to order dog food again. It's just all right, all in the background, all the, whatever you want to call it, AI or algorithms or whatever's going on back there. But again, much more complicated, and it's pretty impersonal. So here's some effective techniques, and this will actually be the test question for this chapter. I'm going to give you 6 of them, but when we roll out that exam, actually it's available tomorrow, you'll need to list 3 of them. So one of them is establishing credibility. That's a way to persuade someone. All right. Again, using the example of a doctor, how do they establish credibility? Well, you walk into the waiting room and what do you see on the wall a lot of time? You see their degrees, right? They've got them framed out there in the waiting room or something like that, and awards or something like that. That establishes credibility because you're like, oh, this guy went to Georgetown or whatever. Actually, it can go the other way as well. One of my doctors, I don't have that many, but I remember I was sitting there as a second appointment. And I looked up and he had gone undergraduate to UC Santa Barbara, just like I did. And so I remember asking him about it when we were in there, and suddenly we turned into two 21-year-olds going, no way, you live there. And I thought that undermined his credibility. Not really, I'm just kidding. But the point is, right, establishing credibility. You know, somebody's telling you something. Well, how do you know this? Well, I'm a CPA and I do taxes. So that's who I would probably ask about the new tax laws, right? So establishing credibility is very important. And so that's why sometimes, you know, if you see news articles and things like that, sometimes written, they'll list someone's credentials at the bottom. If they're writing an article and it's about, you know, international politics, and you get to the end and it'll say so-and-so is the Assistant Secretary of State under Bill Clinton, you'll be like, oh, well, that person probably knows, right, what they're talking about, much more likely to influence you. Making a reasonable and specific request. I think this is really important. Sometimes when people are trying to persuade, they're very vague. I get what's going on. They're kind of hovering out here, trying to figure out what's the right way to go in and do something. But if somebody doesn't make a reasonable and specific request, I'm not going to be influenced. And when you make that reasonable and specific request, you get an answer right away, right? A yes or no answer, and you can move on from there, right? And if it's no, then maybe you can come back with some kind of counter offer. I always think of this one. This is like between my brother and I. This actually happened recently again, because he just moved, but he would call me and he'd say, hey, what's your schedule like this weekend? And I instantly know he wants something, but he doesn't tell me really what it is. I'm like, what? How long is this going to take? What does he want me to do? I'm not babysitting your daughter. You know, I mean, there's all these things going through my head. And then it turns out all he wanted me to do was come over and help him take some couches from the living room to the garage because they were getting new furniture delivered. He should have just said, hey, can you come over Saturday morning for about 15 minutes and help me move some couches into the garage? That's a reasonable, specific. He laughed when I told him this was the example. And he says, well, I was always afraid because you punched me when we were little. But the point is, it's a reasonable and specific request, right? I can just say yes or no. When it's real vague like that, that unknown, right? People are going to push back on that. Tying facts to benefits. So this is something that in sales, people do a really good job of. You know, there's a fact. I mean, I like using cars as an example because, again, I think they do this really well. We're all familiar with them and all those things, right? And sometimes they don't even have to tie the facts to the benefits because we know what they are, right? So if we come out and we tell you, oh, this is a hybrid vehicle, right? That's a fact, right? What's the benefit there? Well, we're going to save a ton of money on gas because you don't have to put too much gas in those cars, right? Fact and benefit. Or you can, in California, you get in the carpool lane, something like that. Safety features. And it's kind of interesting with the cars. When something is brand new, in commercials, they'll explain it to us, right? And then eventually everybody knows what it is and they don't have to tell us. Not that many years ago, they'd say, this car comes with GPS. And everybody's like, what the heck is that? Now everybody's laughing at that, right? Well, they explained what it is, right? GPS is this mapping system and you get to see it on your dashboard. So what was the benefit? You don't get lost, right? Allegedly. Now they don't even have to tell us because everybody, actually, they don't even need to put them. I think they're going to stop putting them in cars because everybody's just got their phones. But the point is, right, fact and benefit. Years ago, a big thing was they would say anti-lock brakes. I think all cars have anti-lock brakes now. Cars used to kind of spin and stuff, or you'd lock up the brakes or whatever on an older car. Now that just kind of stops. They had to explain that. Airbags, when they first came out, right? People weren't like, well, what is this? And they kind of had to explain and everything. Now they don't have to. Now you just see a commercial and we don't even know what goes on anymore. They'll just say a bunch of stuff and they'll be like, this car has 47 side impact airbags or whatever it is. And you're like, wow, it sounds pretty safe. We know what that means, right? Fact it has airbags means a safer car. Tie facts to benefits. That can be very persuasive. Recognizing the power of loss. Again, this is the scarcity thing, right? Act now, buy now. We all, you know what, I don't know if we these cars are really popular. I can try, but if somebody wants to come in tomorrow and buy it before you get here, they're going to buy it. Right. It works, right? We all know that, right? That influences us. I mean, who hasn't gone through that in an interpersonal relationship? Well, if you don't want me around, there's somebody else who wants, right? You'll be missing out. The point is that same thing, that recognizing that power of loss. If I don't do this now, right, how's it going to affect me? Maybe I don't get it at all, or don't get to do it at all, or sometimes I have to pay more down the road, something along those lines. All effective techniques. Expecting and overcoming resistance. I actually think most of us sort of learn this when we're growing up, whether we think so or not. In sales, one of the things is, if you're going to go buy a car, I like to use that as an example again. That's a pretty, who wouldn't want a new car, right? If you didn't have to pay for it or whatever, we'd all probably like a newer car, but the biggest thing to overcome is they're expensive, right? I don't have $45,000 sitting in a bank account. Guess what you can do? You can finance it, no problem, right? That's how they'll always figure it out in terms of how much you can afford each month. It's diabolical, but it's genius, right? Well, we can do financing. Ooh, my credit's not that good. No problem. We've got another loan for you. It's about the same rate as your credit card, but we can do it those are all examples of that. Ooh, but what about my other car? I don't know, I need to sell. You can trade it in, right? Because those are all points of resistance, and you anticipate those sometimes. That's definitely the thing in sales. And I'm sure many of you have done this, whether it was when we were a kid and we wanted to do something and our parents wouldn't let us. When you get a little older, right? I thought I was smart. I go, Mom's going to ask this, and then I'm going to say that, and I thought I had comebacks to her, and then finally she would just go, well, you're not going anyway. Why? Because I'm your mom and I said so. But the point is we learn, right, to sort of overcome and expect those. If you've ever had to ask for a day off at work, right? Sometimes after a little while, you kind of know how those things work. Some people just take the day off, or I know some people like, well, if you don't give me the day off, I'll just call in sick. But I think some of us have been, what, I've arranged this, I got this done ahead of time. So-and-so's covering for me on Friday, because there's going to be some resistance, right? So we expect and we overcome that, and it's more likely for us to be able to influence that person. Finally, sometimes a persuasive technique, right, is just compromise, just meeting someone halfway. Right? Sharing solutions and compromising. That's another way. Maybe someone doesn't want to do that and you're over here, and just, what? Why don't we just split it 50-50? And that can be very persuasive as well. So all 6 of these, again, are some very effective techniques. Sometimes they get used in tandem. People use multiple techniques here. But like I said, this is the essay questions that I have for this particular chapter 10 in your test. And again, all techniques that you see used to help persuade. So some things the authors like to talk about is, number one, what do you want the receiver to do or think? Is always understand, what's your purpose? What am I trying to do here? Am I trying to get someone to buy something? Am I trying to get someone to act a certain way, right? And again, persuasion is in an instance where your audience is not receptive. If you're a manager and you're asking your employee to do something that's part of their job that they're getting paid for, you don't need to go through this indirect pattern for persuasion, right? You shouldn't feel like you have to go through this, right? That's going to be a polite request, and that's going to be direct. However, if it's in another situation, right, it may require I know it feels like it sometimes. I know I had employees for many, many years. Sometimes I felt like, who's in charge here again? There's just those people that can make that kind of challenging for you sometimes. But that would be direct communication. You shouldn't have to persuade someone to do their job that they're getting paid for. Do they need to be persuaded, right? Or in other instances, sometimes somebody may be already very receptive to something, right? And you don't need to spend a whole lot of time thinking about it. I think that's actually what happens in sales. Maybe when it first starts out, somebody's very unreceptive. That's how I think about when I last time I bought a car, when I first started in, and, you can research that thing, you can research that stuff to death online nowadays, but contacting somebody at a dealership and going in physical, because at some point you got to go look at the actual car, right? Or drive it or whatever. The first time in, I'm like, I'm not buying anything today. Next time I went and did something, or I probably talked to him on the phone, when I first went in, I was, I was much more interested in listening, but I wasn't there yet. The day I went in, I knew I was actually going to buy it. That was the easiest sale they ever made, right? Because it was a process the whole way to get there, right? So the last time he didn't really need to persuade me a whole lot because mostly it was just coming down to what color and what model and things like that, right? And then finally, how can you adapt your message to appeal to the receiver? Some people appeal, it's kind of that. Some people, emotion works better. Some people, logic works better. I think emotion tends to work on more people just because we aren't, despite what we think, people are not rational, right? The emotion is definitely an appeal, but you can see that in different, right, types of pitches. A great example of an emotional appeal, for instance, is when they show I think it's the ASPCA or one of those, they show the commercial, they're playing the super sad music and they're showing you the pictures of the animals, and the animal, there's a dog on crutches and another with an eye patch, and, they're playing the super sad music, and that's just a straight up emotional appeal. They're not even hiding that, right? They could put up facts, right? And say every day in this country, if it was just numbers, probably wouldn't be as appealing. We'd probably be a little, for lack of a better term, a little grossed out probably by the amount of pet euthanasia there is, but that wouldn't really do it. But when we see the animals and we see them and they look sad and everything else, and then people can relate to it because they've got a dog or they've got a cat or whatever, emotional appeals work really well. So how do you adjust the message, right, to work with people? Even within car sales, there's some people that are very logical. They want to know the technical specs, right? This, and this. Maybe the features, this, and this. Other people, it's like, oh, do you have it in black? I mean, one of my favorites is if you ever go buy a car, when you sit down and you're just kind of sit down in a car for the first time, you know what they always say to you? They always go, you look great in that car. Like you're trying on clothes or something, right? Why? It works. So if you need to research, what do you need? What kind of information do you need? And again, that's sort of understanding your audience and where can you locate it? Which strategy is better, indirect or direct? Like I said, in certain situations, direct will work well. The writing assignments I'll give you for next week, they're going to be indirect, right? And so it's going to be similar to bad news in that we build up to it, right? We build up to it as opposed to just jumping right in. And then finally, just revising, we make sure this message is clear and concise, because they will all be email messages for this particular class. Is it conversational? I think that's really important when you're persuading someone. It's kind of interesting. I think if I probably asked you, if you wanted to persuade someone, what channel would you choose? If I needed to persuade someone, I would, without question, choose face-to-face. Phone, a distant second, everything else, forget it. Why? Because if I'm there face-to-face, two things. I think number one, I can read a person a little bit and I can kind of see what's going on and that sort of thing. And number two, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but it's a lot harder to say no to somebody in person. It just is, right? You can, phone, it's a little easier. I mean, think about it, especially if you work with customers, right? People will say anything and nasty stuff via email because there's no, like they just hit send and they go. It's a little harder on the phone, right? But people can still do it. I know I worked in customer service long enough. I've been called enough things. People will definitely do it. But in person, it's a lot harder. A lot harder. Not for some people, but it's the percentage of people that are willing to do it will stop. I remember I had a loan manager years ago who had someone yelling at him on the phone, and the guy came in and everything. And, I was like, are you sure you want that guy coming in here? Should we, because it was, I forget what the whole situation was. Guy came in, they sat down, they talked it out. He left, they shook hands, and they walked away. And I remember the gentleman who worked for me, he said, or with me, he said, he goes, man, he goes, that guy sounded crazy and, expletive on the phone. He goes, came in here, couldn't be nicer. And then I looked at him and I go, well, yeah, it's harder to be angry in person. Then I looked at my loan officer and I go, and you're 6'8". He probably didn't want to say anything. The guy was 6'8". Yeah, my employee was, I go, yeah, that probably changed his tune a little bit. But the point is, right, I would want to do it face-to-face, but we're going to use email in this situation. And I think actually good persuasion, you kind of are doing both, right? Sometimes you're going to do this multiple. You might send an email out to someone and follow up with a phone call. Are format, grammar, and mechanics correct? I think that's really important. if you've got I think it's always important, but I think especially if you're trying to persuade someone and you're trying to show credibility, and if you've got typos or something in there, it just shoots all your credibility. I remember seeing a billboard a few years ago. It was for one of the sports teams in LA. I think it was up off the 5 freeway somewhere there. And I don't know, it was totally stuck in traffic. That's why I got to see it for 5 minutes, somewhere up there in Santa Fe Springs or wherever the 5 goes to die. But, and they had a typo in there. They'd misspelled a word. And so I didn't even read the sign. I'm like, I can't believe they have this giant sign on the freeway. And they spelled the word champion. It said Chamapon. And I was dying. It was just one of those things. And so it loses all, right? If it's a typo, it loses all credibility. And then finally, will you achieve your purpose? Well, we obviously don't know that, right? Until we find out whether or not they've been influenced. So if you worked in sales, you've probably seen something like this before, right? And it's just the pattern, the indirect pattern for persuading, right? And I have it listed a little differently on the chapter handouts that I put up in Canvas. But the first thing we want to do is get someone's attention, right? We want to gain attention. And that's where this comes in, attention, right? And so that's why, a lot of times, and think about it, even if you work in retail sales, right? What's the first thing somebody does when you're looking to close or something? They ask you, hi, how are you? Is there anything I can help you with today? It's just a simple way to get your attention, right? And then they kind of read things from there, yay or nay. And if it's no, I'm good, or whatever it is, oh yeah, I do have some questions, then we move on, right? Then the next part of that is when we've got someone's attention, we build interest, right? We start talking about it a little more. You walk into the car dealership, hey, how you doing? Da, da, da. Yeah, I was looking at this, Audi A6 here, oh, that's a great car. Yeah, it's got this, this, and this, and this, that, and that, and all, they start talking about it, right? Building your interest. You may have questions and they'll continue helping build your interest. The next one, we say desire. That always sounds weird to me. That sounds a little too personal for some reason, like we should be using another context in life, but oh well. But I also call it reducing resistance, because one of the things we need to do is we need to kind of anticipate those reasons why someone is not going to be influenced, right? And get them to really want to be influenced. And then finally, the last one is motivate action. And you'll see this in sales all the time, right? They call it asking for the business, right? That's great. Someone's ready to go. And then what do they say in the store? They're like, great, well, let me go ahead. Let's go. I'll take these over. We'll ring these up for you, right? That's a simple way of motivating action. Otherwise, you're just standing there looking at the clothes rack. That's why in a car dealership, they're like, well, that's great. Did you want to go ahead and drive it out today? Again, moving people towards, right, the close. And that's one of the other, there's another acronym in sales that gets used. They say ABC, always be closing, right? So it's always, you're always trying to, without overwhelming somebody, right? Because if you just say, if you do all these steps and then walk away and go, well, let me know if you have any questions, somebody's probably not going to have any questions and they're probably just going to leave and you're not going to have things. So you need to be working towards that motivating action, right? Because what's the worst that somebody can say? If you're trying to persuade someone, what's the worst thing somebody can say? No, that's the worst that someone can say. And I know that's tough, right? We don't want to hear that, but that's just the way it is. So the first one, gaining attention, there's some different ways we can do this. Go take a look at the notes that I posted on Canvas. There's like some really good examples in each one of these of what you can do. So one thing is you can summarize the problem a little bit. You see this in, I'm trying to think of some good ads for this. Actually, pharmaceutical products, when they advertise them on TV, right? Or any medical products, or I was like, do you suffer from, and they'll ask these things. That's a summary of a problem, right? It gets our attention. An unexpected statement. How would you like to save 15% on your auto insurance? We might laugh at it. I'm not even sure which one of those companies it is that are on there all the time. I think that's the Gecko, right? I can't keep track of them. But the point is, right? Unexpected statement. We're like, yeah, of course I would. And we throw those things out. Yeah, I thought it was Geico. I wasn't sure. I can't, like I said, I can't. They all kind of run together for me. They all kind of do the same thing. But that's a great question, right? It's their tagline. And yeah, I would. Who wouldn't? A benefit. That's also a benefit, right? I'm saving 15% on my auto insurance, but that's another thing, right? If you can tell someone how they benefit, that gets their attention. I'm thinking about all kinds of products now, supplements and healthcare, or not healthcare, but kind of supplements and this and that. Like, do you want to, be healthy or whatever different thing that gets thrown out there, right? Well, of course I'd, like to lose my COVID-19 belly and, a few other things and that sort of thing. Cite those benefits. A compliment, that's always a good one, especially in a personal situation, right? When some of you probably know that, right? There's always someone you work with who, when they compliment you, you're like, all right, what's going on? Like, they never usually, hey, have you been working out? Did you lose weight? Did you get a haircut? Whatever it might be, something like that, right? Something's up. But you know what? Guess what? Why? Compliments work, right? People like compliments. So that's a good way to get someone's attention. And sometimes related facts will work as well. But any of these are all ways to get someone's attention. And that's why you see in a lot of advertising, right? They kind of just jump right in with stuff, right? They just jump right out and they start talking about it. A stimulating question. Again, that goes back to that, do you want to save 15% on your auto insurance or something along those lines, right? These all run together a little bit, but how do you get someone's attention? Because now now I'm listening, because that's our first step, get them to listen. So when we're building interest, there's certain ways we can do it. Facts and figures in certain situations work really, and sometimes you'll see multiple ways of doing this. It's kind of interesting to me. A change I've noticed in advertising for automobiles is used to be a lot more facts and figures. And now it's a lot more, there's facts and figures still there, but it's a lot more emotional. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I asked someone who works in the advertising industry and she explained to me, it was pretty simple. She goes, well, because cars are better now. Like almost all cars work. She goes, it doesn't matter. You get a Hyundai, a Subaru, an Audi, a VW, whatever. I mean, occasionally there's problems, but they're so much better now that it's harder for people to differentiate. So it used to just be, you still see it, I think, with trucks and stuff like that, right? Towing capacity and torque and, things like that. But yeah, a lot less facts and figures, but in certain situations, right, works really well. Expert opinions, again, and this goes to authority, why do we have certain, athletes endorse products or something like that? Well, geez, if it's making, that guy jump out of the gym, I should also drink Gatorade, that kind of thing, even though we really need to have a conversation to explain to you it's probably genetics and, 20 years of hard work. But the point is, right, they represent an expert opinion in some cases. Providing examples, right? Just examples sometimes helps build someone's interest. Specific details. And again, I've got your attention now, I'm giving you information, right? That's what building interest is. Direct benefits. We also have indirect benefits. And I think this is kind of interesting. So a good example here might be hybrid or electric vehicles, right? What's the direct benefit of owning one of those? You save money on gas, right? You're either purchasing no gas or a little gas. That's a direct benefit to you. Indirect benefit, saving the planet, right? And both of those things get woven into the advertising. Finally, the next part, eliciting desire. That sounds like the title of a bad movie on late at night on Cinemax or something. But reducing resistance. So somebody's going to have resistance to it. There's going to be something holding somebody back from doing it, right? So how do we encourage them to move forward? Well, sometimes maybe it's financing. Sometimes maybe it's a coupon, a discount, something like that, right? And then you anticipate those objections. Like I said, good salespeople are aware of these. They've been trained. They have experience. They're well aware of what kind of things, what reasons people are going to give, why not to buy something. And part of their job is to anticipate those and then help reduce that resistance. It doesn't mean that they're still going to be able to sell the product, right? But you start reducing the resistance and someone's going to be much more likely, right, to be influenced. When I was in my 20s, it seemed like every weekend somebody I knew was moving. I think I knew that because I used to own a pickup truck. And after that, I said, never again, because everybody wants your help. And some people were great. They'd be like, oh yeah, can you help me move? And, I'd get there and they were ready to go. Right? They had everything ready. All we had to do is pick it up, throw it in a bunch of trucks, get it to the house, unload it, and then there's pizza and beer, and we're good to go. That helped reduce our resistance, right? We knew that person was organized. They were going to feed us, give us food and drink afterwards, made it much more likely to do it, right? They reduced our resistance. On the other hand, the person you help move and you show up at their house and they haven't packed everything up yet, different story. Offer counter arguments, right? Again, that's sort of the anticipating, right, objections. Maybe not this, but how about this? What if scenarios? You see this a lot, especially at a higher level, especially if somebody's maybe a vendor trying to sell something to a company, it's kind of a cost benefit analysis. Right now you're doing things this way, right? It's costing you this much. You do things, you purchase our product. Yes, it's going to cost you this much up front, but you're going to be saving, this much money every day. It pays for itself in 6 months, right? That's a what if scenario. Demonstrating competence. I think this is really important. If somebody's trying to persuade you, have you ever been somewhere and you ask a salesperson some questions and they're like, I don't know. I'm like, I thought you worked here. I think that's really, really important. And we know the difference, right? Good salespeople, right? They know their stuff, right? They can tell us all about the product. I mean, it's the same thing. Like I said, sorry to keep using myself, but when I sat down in that car, that guy was showing me everything, how to use everything. And I got home and I was like, I don't know how to run that stuff. I was like, how do I turn it on and how do I get home? And then figuring out all the electronics later. There's still things I'm looking up to this day occasionally. I'm like, how does that work again? Very competent, right? Very knowledgeable, right? On the other hand, if they just gone, well, you know what, you can do this, but there's an owner's manual in the glove box, which is literally what was going to happen anyway with me. But that's not a very, because we're not always just buying the product or the service. We're buying that salesperson. And there is an adage in there when people are influencing us is that really we're basing it off of that person, right? Or persons as much as we are the actual product or service, right? We might be purchasing. And it makes a huge difference. Value of proposal, again, much like the what if scenario, right? How this is going to benefit somebody financially. Like I said, you see this a lot of times with companies when they're bringing something on board because making changes is going to cost you money, right? I mean, I think a good example of this would be, for instance, if somebody's getting solar panels installed in their house, right? That's not a small investment. Those can run tens of thousands of dollars, right? And so how's that going to work out? Well, you need to be able to show that person if and how it's going to pay for itself, right? Between saving them money on electricity, and I know there's some tax benefits that actually make it worthwhile as well. But that would be a value proposal because I don't know, man. I don't think I want to spend $30,000 on solar panels. I'm only spending $47 a month on electricity. I can handle that. $23,000. You have to show somebody, right, how that's going to benefit them financially. And then finally, prompting action. Ultimately, we need to get someone to buy, right, or act, whatever it might be. So again, describe the specific request. Again, what is it, right? Be specific. Again, that's that reasonable, specific request. Sound confident. The last thing, if you're trying to persuade somebody, right, and influence them, you don't want to sound, and I know it's not easy. I mean, it's never easy to do that, especially, gosh, if you're first starting out, if you're young and in a sales job, it is so hard sometimes. But yeah, you need to sound confident. Like, all right, did you want to go ahead and drive that home today? Sound very confident. That's much more likely to influence somebody. But, well, if you'd like, we can do the paperwork, and maybe if you want, you can take it home. A lot less likely to do it, right? And it's kind of that way with anything in life. I know, and sometimes it can be misleading. Sometimes we're misled. Sometimes there's people that will say things and sound very confident and authoritative. And then afterwards you realize they had no idea what they were talking about. Actually, I've done that before, right? Sound confident. Well, the other one, I didn't think about this, but it's the same thing. What if somebody's asking somebody out on a date, right? Well, if you're not doing anything, God knows I've been there, if you're not doing it, you might be like, I don't know. Whereas if somebody's like, sounds confident, you're like, all right, we got plans now. Sound confident when you're doing it. Make the action easy to take. This is one of those things where sometimes this is great. Now we need to go do this, 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 and this. I forget what retailer it was once years ago where I wanted to, buy something, and I had to go take it to another floor to some cash register or something. And I was like, why don't you have a cash register right here? And why aren't you ringing this up? And why aren't you doing it? I mean, I still bought the stuff. I forget where it was years ago in one of the department stores, but I thought they need to think about that, right? Because there's a good chance that on the way to that, whatever that other floor is, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do this. Or you get somewhere and there's a hideous long line, right? I understand that in some retail stores. That's just the way it is. They're very popular, but I don't know. Anybody else here ever just abandoned their shopping cart and gone, forget it. I'm out later. I'm going to the other Target or whatever it is. Make the action easy to take. Make it very simple for someone to do it. You don't, because otherwise you're giving someone the opportunity, right, to back out of it. It makes it much easier for someone to not do something. Another thing very common, especially in sales, offer incentives or gifts. Sometimes it might be, there's rebates sometimes, or a free gift or whatever, or those kind of things. And those can be very powerful. Even if they're not anything significant, people love that stuff. People absolutely love it, feel like they're getting something free. I remember a number of years ago, I think it was always some of the cosmetic companies, and it was like the men's fragrances. They were like, there was one, I forget who it was, they're probably not even around anymore. They were advertising like, and if you act now and if you buy this, you get it was like a gym bag or something, and people went nuts for it. It was Polo or something like that. I don't know, Ralph Lauren. It was crazy, but people love that stuff, right? And that can be another, and that's why companies do it. And if you've ever worked somewhere that was giving away free stuff, God forbid if you run out of it, right? People lose their minds, even if it's junk. Don't provide excuses. Again, that's kind of that being confident thing. And then again, repeat the main benefits, right? This is what you're getting out of this particular product. So some things to do, because we want to be ethical in our persuasion. I know that sounds quaint, especially when more and more we see people who aren't particularly ethical, and no matter what your political affiliation, we see leaders on all sides of things in this country not being ethical and not being, and trying to persuade us and not being particularly ethical or honest. But as business people, I think it is important to do that, if for no other reason, because we'll be held accountable at some point. I know lots of people like to, say, oh, this business is doing this or they're doing that, or they're, not so great or evil or whatever the heck it is. But if you think about it, when a business isn't ethical, eventually sometimes they can sustain, they might get sued or there might be legal action taken against them, but that all takes time. But what we know as consumers, if a company isn't treating people ethically, eventually they lose business, right? Eventually it does affect them in the marketplace. So one of the things too, you want to build credibility. I think it's be truthful and believable. All right. I think that's really important. Right. There's an old saying, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And that never goes out of style. I mean, you definitely have to think about it. Just recently, it was like a friend of a friend, and I knew a person who they wanted to do some remodeling on their home. And I think it was involving a kitchen, whatever it was, the contractor's number was way too low. And I thought, you can't get that done for that amount. Oh, well, no, they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And they were just out like 12 grand, just gone. The guy's just gone. And I'm like, well, yeah, a kitchen, what you wanted to do was probably going to cost you a minimum of $30,000. Like, what made you think that was going to work? So I felt bad for them, but you have to, which is why you got to get multiple bids and ask other people and everything else, right? So I think it's really important. So, when somebody isn't believable, if it doesn't sound right, question that. So I think that's why it's really important for us. We don't necessarily want to go overboard, to the point where we're going to, deter someone from doing something, but be truthful and be believable. Stick to the facts and don't exaggerate. Sometimes you'll hear people say, we're the number one at this and we're growing, the fastest growing and all those things. I understand that. But again, I think it's important because people want to know the facts. And once you start exaggerating, sometimes people are going to mishear you, and that can bite you down the road. And again, don't manipulate or mislead. And I know that especially in sales, this is a problem sometimes. The ethical part of it is a problem for salespeople. Sometimes some of it does go on the buyer. I mean, I've known many people who have, usually you see it sometimes in financial products and things like that. People end up buying into something and, they're like, well, I didn't understand, or I didn't know this, or I didn't know that. And I'm always kind of looking at them and go, you're an adult, you signed a contract. It's kind of important for you to figure that out. But at the same time, why does it happen in sales? All you have to know is, how are people compensated, right? People in sales don't get paid unless they sell. So often there is an incentive for them. They need to sell. But again, we're trying to be ethical. Don't omit crucial information. I think that's it's not even a gray area, but sometimes people leave that out. They're like, well, I didn't lie to them. I'm like, yeah, you also didn't tell them all the facts that they needed to know. This used to be a really common problem in the mortgage industry. A lot of people would get a loan that was at a really low rate the first 6 months, and then it would bump up after 6 months. And sometimes the loan folks would leave that out. And on the 7th month, I'd have a customer in my office irate because their monthly payment had gone up $300 or something like that, because the loan officer kind of left that out. And that's kind of a crucial feature. And yeah, legally they had to sign a document and everything, but you don't want to be doing that to people. Don't provide deceptive emphasis. In other words, it's the same thing. Don't omit the crucial information. All right. So just a couple examples of some things that you can do. So when we're pre-writing, again, determine your purpose. Know what you want to achieve. What am I trying to do? Again, maybe initially it's just getting someone to listen to me. Ultimately, maybe I want them to act, but initially I just want them to listen to me. And whether you're in sales or service or whatever, sometimes you just have to be patient for that. I know sometimes salespeople do get impatient. They don't get paid unless they sell. They want an impact. They want all kinds of things like that. I know a year or two ago, there was somebody who was contacting me at the college. It's, we get all kinds of salespeople, especially in the last year. Anybody who did anything with remote education wanted us to buy stuff. But I remember I got an email from this person. I was like, oh, this sounds interesting, but I was busy, so I just deleted it and moved on. Got another one a couple weeks later. I said, I should check this out, but I didn't. And then finally, so the whole thing lasted about a month. I think there were 3 or 4 emails. And I got an email from the salesperson and it said, if you're not going to answer me, then don't, or it was something, it was really weird. And I was like, and I kept thinking like, are we dating? Like, what did I do? But it was a really odd response. And I thought, why would you do that? Why would you, it was very passive aggressive because I hadn't replied to the previous emails. And I kept thinking like, well, first of all, I might eventually have checked out your product. Wouldn't it have been better to sell it 6 months from now or 12 months from now rather than take that? It was just a really, really odd response. But that's the point, is sometimes people are impatient. And if you're the one trying to persuade, you just have to move on from that, because you might get them at another time. We never know. Also, I kind of felt like, well, if it was really important, you probably should have picked up the phone and called me. My phone's published in about 8 places on the website. So not that hard. But remember this, your audience is always thinking, why should I? Why should I? Right? What's in it for me? I think I know that sounds super selfish, but that's kind of the way it is. That's just reality. And also I'm thinking, well, what's in it for you? Well, you want to make a sale, right? You get paid. You want me to do something. It's because we need to finish a project, right? And I think we need to understand that it's got to work for both sides. How do we gain attention? Again, another thing is, again, we just want to kind of throw that out there. We don't want to jump right in, right? Like I said, if you're in the store looking at clothes, they don't walk right up to you and say, do you want to go ahead and buy those jeans? I might save some time, but usually they're just going to ask you nicely, right? Is there anything I can help you with? And that's just a way to gain attention. And so again, some of the examples that I gave you fit into that. You probably don't want to yell as loud as this little cartoon guy on the screen, though. That might be annoying. Build interest. Again, I've got your attention. Now I'm building up your interest. Convince them that your request is reasonable. If something seems unreasonable, you've got no chance, right? No chance of persuading someone to do something. You can use facts. Testimonials are always a big one. Specific details, all those kinds of things. And again, establishing your credibility, your knowledge. I think knowledge is probably the biggest thing in this particular case. Sometimes it's just experience, but I think knowledge, right, and experience, they're both very important. And again, tie facts to benefits, direct benefits, indirect benefits, all those kinds of things. And sometimes, again, that's why I was saying face your people, right? They just are. Like I said, some people are going to be very driven by the facts and they're like, oh, I'm going to save money for this. Great. Whereas somebody else maybe needs something a little bit different. Again, anticipate your objections. Again, always demonstrate your credibility and your competence. I think that's really important. If it starts to feel like you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to be really hard to influence somebody. And again, try, if somebody's making a claim or you're making a claim or a complaint, I guess I should say, and I know we already touched on this with the positive message, use a moderate, unemotional tone, right? If you're trying to persuade somebody, and again, it's a claim or complaint, it's always better to use that moderate, unemotional tone. Does the emotional tone work sometimes? Of course, right? Give the baby a pacifier. We're tired of hearing him cry. You know what? Go ahead and give that customer a refund. Get them out of here. I don't want to hear it. But generally speaking, you're going to get a lot more done, right, if you just keep it about business. Because ultimately, there's always somebody else you're dealing with, another human being over there. And, you know, people are just human. They're just human. I mean, I know not at the college, thank goodness, I don't think, but I know once or twice when somebody got on my nerves when I was a bank manager, we'd be leaving, my assistant would go, aren't you going to take care of that guy's ATM card? I'm like, do it tomorrow. I'm like, he's not going to have any cash. I'm like, I don't care. Because all the guy did was yell and cuss at me on the phone. Like, why should I? Totally unprofessional. I admit it. Don't care anymore. I don't work for him. Actually, that company doesn't exist anymore, so it doesn't matter. Customer's probably dead by now anyway. But it was 25 years ago. But the point is, you got human beings at the other end, and sometimes they're going to do those things, right? Or I'll get to that later. You know, those kind of things. I mean, think about it. If someone's yelling at you, do you want to help them now? Maybe to get them to shut up. But really, if somebody's antagonizing you, do you really want to help them out? Probably not, right? So again, I always say, keep it about business, keep it unemotional as much as you possibly can. Finally, motivating action. Again, make a specific request, right? Make a specific request. Add a deadline date if it's necessary. Sometimes there are things that have a deadline. You're going to need information by a certain day or something along those lines. And then again, always repeat a key benefit, provide additional details, offer an incentive, right? And also always express appreciation, whether or not you're able to persuade them. Always do that, because it may not happen now, but it might happen down the road. And then again, be confident without seeming pushy. And again, I know that's one of those gray areas, because to some people, any bit of confidence seems pushy. I know that. I know there's some people there that are very much hands off. I don't care if someone's a pushy salesperson, I can still tell them no. But I know some people that really drives them crazy, and that's why you just sort of have to read the room in that particular case. And then finally, just some different benefits. You're focusing on direct benefits versus indirect benefits. So there's an example in these slides, and I attached them to the announcement last night, where a group is trying to get someone to come speak, right? And one of the things is, if you accept our invitation to speak, you have an audience of 50 potential customers for our products. So there's, why should I come speak? Well, there's 50 people here that might buy your product. That's a very direct benefit. An indirect benefit, on the other hand, is maybe by showing up and doing it, it just means people are going to maybe hold you in a little higher esteem, right? It shows your professionalism and you're willing to give back and all those things. So that's kind of more of a long-term benefit, I guess, would be how indirect shows up. All right, so I'm going to stop right there with the slides. I have one other quick example for you. This will just take a couple minutes, and it's in this week's Canvas module. So one second here. Hopefully it doesn't go off. I hate it when they do that. They just go. All right. So.
Hi, it's Fitz with Slapchop. You're going to be in it.
All right. So yeah, it's an infomercial. It's a couple years old, more than a couple. It's probably like 10 now. But infomercials are really great at showing us the indirect pattern for persuasive messages because they're so over the top, right? But it's really easy to see. How do they get our attention? Well, he's loud, right? They get our attention. How do they build our interest? You'll see that. He's going to show us a lot of different things, right? How do they reduce resistance? Well, there's some things in there that you're like, oh, I don't know. And they'll go, oh, this looks like a pretty good deal. And then finally, how do they motivate action? You ever seen an infomercial at the end, right? They're like, call now, operator standing by, you know, or if you can't pay $50, it's $49.99 or 5 easy payments of $9.99 a month, all those things. We might laugh at the infomercials, but they do a really, really good job of highlighting this pattern. And also because they're very obvious, because these are usually products we're not familiar with, right? It's something new or something like that that isn't kind of part of the traditional stuff you see in stores and things like that. So they have to be like that. So enjoy Vince here for the next couple minutes and Slap Chop.
A great mood all day because you're going to be slapping your troubles away with the slap chop. Now look, here's a potato. One slap, you got big chunks for stews. 2 slaps, home fries in a second. And look at this. When you add a mushroom, the more you do, finally gets you with the switch any grains. Now, you love salad. You hate making it. You know you hate making salad. That's why you don't have any salad in your diet. Watch this. 1 slap, salad. I love pizza too, but once in a while, get the veggies in. At least throw it on top of the pizza. You're going to change your eating habits. Soup, coleslaw stuff. You want 5 seconds, 4 or 5 seconds, it's done. This tuna looks boring. Stop having a boring tuna. Stop having a boring life. Add this tuna, put it here like this. Now you're gonna have a nice tuna salad. Look at this. You're gonna have an exciting life now. Look, here's a hard-boiled egg. 1 shot, you add the pickle, you add the green onion. And what you can do, you can mix things together. You add the ham, and you're gonna love this. You don't have time to make breakfast. Breakfast to go. You're gonna love my nuts. Watch this. Almonds, walnuts, comes with a cover. So you can do everything in the cover, all right? Or you can do it on the board, whatever you'd like. So easy, 1 finger. If I can do it 1 finger, you guys can do it with your whole hand. Kids can do it. You know what they charge at the ice cream stores? $1 for toppings at the ice cream stores. Add a couple cookies if you want. You can make it for 10 cents. Stop throwing your money away. You know, not only nuts, what about fruit? Put a mango. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful on your ice cream? The reason you're going to slap away every day is because it's so easy to clean. 1, 2. And pops open like that, like a butterfly to clean. Now, these other ones that you've seen in the stores, bacteria gets in the food. All the stores have this. You can't clean it. Can't open this up. It's worthless. Forget about it. Now, take the slap chop, put it back together, and you get the garlic. All right, here's the garlic with the skin. There you go. The skin is the garlic. You're going to eat more garlic. The onions with the skin. All right, this is making you cry, making me cry. All right, life's hard enough as it is. You don't want to cry anymore. Put the slap chop right there. The skin's at the bottom. And look, if you want a little bit of onions, you don't want to drag out the food processor, the skin comes right off. You see that? All right, now put a tomato in there. Add your cilantro, your hot peppers right there. You can hit it like this. Guys, we're going to make America skinny again. 1 slap at a time.
It's very quick. It's a time saver for recipes.
Take it apart, washes, put it in the drawer, good to go.
It's easy. You just got 1 hand and chop.
Now, here's the deal. When you buy the slap chop, we're going to give you the grading for cheese. White cheese, yellow cheese in the container. Comes with a twister. And watch this. Tacos, fettuccine, linguine, martini, bikini. Look at that. Comes with 2 blades. Just bang it. Cheese comes right out. Fine and coarse. Parmesan comes with a cover. Stays sealed. Put it in the fridge. Take it out when you need it. Pass it around the table. You're going to love this thing. The slap chop sells for $19.95. But if you call now, within the next 20 minutes, because you know we can't do this all day, you're going to get the gravy absolutely free. So that's 2 for $19.95. The slap chop with the gravy. Here's how to order.
Call 1-800-951.
Okay, I can leave that on the screen if anybody wants to buy it. I have no idea if it's still valid or not, but that's a really good example of the pattern, right? How do they get our attention, right? He's loud, talks fast, uses humor, right? That all kind of, and also, as we all know, right, sometimes on the TV, for whatever reason, the commercials are actually louder. Like, who hasn't been woken up before? You fall asleep watching a movie or something, all of a sudden the commercial comes on and, you know, jars you out of your, you know, sleep. But that's how they get our attention. How does he build our interest? Well, he keeps going through, right? He goes through my entire fridge, chopping everything up, right? Breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert, whatever, right? That's how they kind of keep going in there. And he keeps talking. And then the other thing too, he keeps talking about, oh, if you use this, right, you're going to chop up the healthy foods. Reducing resistance. So why do you maybe not want to get one of these? Well, one of the things they showed us was, right, I guess in the chop product world, they're hard to clean, right? He showed us how easy it was to clean it. You know, reducing resistance, the testimonials, those were real people, right? Those were not actors for sure. They just grabbed 3 people at the swap meet, I think, right? And you're looking at them going, you know, if they can use it, I should have no trouble using this, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, it was very, very basic, you know, with that. What else reduces your resistance? And one other thing too, with the persuasive pattern, in the bad news pattern, it was very clear where each one of those steps was. These is just a little fuzzier. So things that reduce your resistance, maybe it is you get the Grady and the foldable cutting board, right? You're like, you know, you weren't sure, but you're like, oh yeah, I've got that foldable cutting board. Now I'm in. So that reduces your resistance, but it also motivates your action. So those two things kind of bleed together a little bit. You know, what else motivates you to act? You know, they tell you right here, you know, they tell you you've got all these different ways to pay. You can go online, you can call the number, right? Again, make it easy, right? For someone to take action. Everything short of will bring it to your house. And those are all, they do a really good job in the video. Like I said, I know it's over the top and kind of clown show and things like that, but they do a really, and you know what? It's a $20 product. I mean, what's the, you know, this isn't like you're buying something for $2,000. It doesn't work out. You're out $20, you know, or probably a little more because I'm sure shipping and handling doubles that up. But the point is, they do a really good job of showing all the pieces, right, of the persuasive pattern. And then not to mention, they're just super entertaining, right? And that's one of the reasons why I kind of like the infomercials, because it's just, you know, the way they go about it. Now he's going to be very different with this. And again, a lot of them, right, they're really loud, right? Aren't they? They're really, really loud. I forget the one, where's the guy that's just like making the boat out of the plastic sealer or whatever, you know, that, I don't know what that one's called. What is it? Flex Seal. The guy's like, yeah, it does this, it does that. Some of those are really, really loud. Then you get other products, right, where they're a little bit mellower. You know, if it's skincare products, they're usually not yelling at you, you know. But the point is, they do a really, really good job of showing you the persuasive pattern in addition to entertaining.